We've now heard from all 5 think tanks which budget's the best. Our 3 judges have been judging. David Asman, Sandra Smith, Bob Beckel. Have you picked your winners?
We have, Your Honor.
Okay, David, you start.
Well, I may never be invited back to the Heritage Foundation, but the Bipartisan Institute has a flat tax, which is about the only thing my friend Bob Beckel and I agree on, is that we should move to get rid of deductions.
You're picking the Bipartisan Institute.
I'm picking a Bipartisan.
Jay Powell, can you come out, take a seat here? Thank you. It's our first finalist, Sandra Smith.
Okay, I commend Stuart and the Heritage Foundation for a couple of reasons. The biggest is that the point of these proposals, Stuart, was to balance the budget. And Stuart's plan was the only one that told me that the budget's going to be balanced and when it's going to be balanced.
Bob Beckel?
Well, I had a difficult choice between bipartisan and the Demos, but I went with Demos, and I'll tell you why. I went with them. I didn't get to say this when we were talking about it, but they cut the defense budget by
David Callahan from Demos, why don't you come out while he explains?
They cut the defense budget by $960 billion. You know that next year the United States will spend more on defense than every other country in the world combined.
And let's start with Stuart on that. We have to spend $700 billion every year?
We have to spend what's necessary to defend ourselves.
Yes.
And that's the key thing. Nobody wants to spend money on defense. We'd much rather spend it on other things. But the fact is, if you look at what the world's like, if you look at what we've had to spend in the past, and if you make reasonable projections about what it's going to need to make sure we don't rotate...
We need 50,000 soldiers in Germany?
We may do. But if we don't need them there, we need them somewhere else. We need them to rotate in Afghanistan and Iraq and so on. We are overstretching our current soldiers.
What in the world do you think you need $700 billion for defense? And second, let me follow what John said. 50,000 troops in Germany. As you pointed out, we won that war. There's absolutely nothing except for a very good hospital. I'll give you that. Why do we have troops in Japan?
30,000.
Germany and Korea.
30,000 there, too.
I mean, it's a complete waste of money.
Have you ever heard of China?
Yeah, I have heard of China, and I worry about China,
That's
too.
That's one major reason. And North Korea, have you heard of North Korea?
Yeah, and
well, they have nuclear weapons.
Yeah, they do. And
Iran has nuclear weapons.
And so we're going to make our 30,000 troops in South Korea then to be the targets for nuclear weapons?
Look, the issue is not the level of troops. As I said over and over again, nobody wants to spend too much on defense.
Except
I don't.
Except the defense contractors.
Yeah, well, we're not talking about them. Come on, you know.
Well, there's a
serious conversation about what you do.
They're impossible to pull away from it. I don't mean to dominate with Stuart here, but I'd like to ask him about consumption tax. What about Milton Friedman's fear that instead of just switching from the IRS and a tax on what we earn, we would have, in addition to that, we would have the consumption tax. That is, it'd be loaded on top of what we already have. That's what scares me about a consumption or sales tax.
You're actually misunderstanding. The tax. You're mixing it up with a value-added tax, like I lived under in Europe, and you're exactly right about that, or a national sales tax, which I think would be ridiculous. What we mean by a consumption tax is what you consume, what you spend. So you shield savings.
But I don't want the government to know what I spend.
No, wait a minute. But you save. What you save is not taxed. What you spend is taxed.
But I'd have to tell the government everything about what I spend?
Look, you have to, if you're going to have a tax system where everybody's treated fairly, then we do have to have, I'm afraid, a situation where you can't have people hiding money and so on. It's got to be fair, it's got to be equal, it's got to be a single rate.
I want to hide my money.
I'm going to hide some money, too. Okay.
Can I just say that the one thing that Bob and I agree on, I mean, if Bob and I can agree on anything, maybe it should be enacted, which is a flat tax.
I think a flat tax.
Get rid of deductions and get down to a flat tax.
Absolutely.
I'd also, and we'll let them have their moment. What would be your method of tracking this as you go along? I mean, what are you measuring as this budget plan would be carried out? How do you track the progress?
We want to have an ironclad cap on both spending and taxes of 18.5% of GDP. Americans, for the last 50 years, have basically said, if you tax us somewhere between 18 and 19%, we're okay. You go above that, and we got problems, like at the end of the Carter administration and the Clinton administration.
Excuse me, taxes at 20% of GDP at the end of the Clinton administration.
That's what I said. At the end of the Clinton administration, then immediately Americans said, we want a different party in power, and we want taxes to come down. So we do that. And we would like to see a constitutional amendment or some other provision that would hold the line at that. But once you've done that, then you've got to decide how you how you make the cuts.
And for
that's
the
what
think
we're
tanks on the
focused
other side of you, if your goal is not to balance the budget, as the Heritage Foundation is, what is the goal?
Our goal is to bring deficits down to a manageable level.
Okay, stabilizing.
You don't need to balance it. What you need to do is make sure that the economy is growing faster than the debt, and you do that if you get within 1 or 2%.
It is a myth, isn't it, that the budget has to be balanced and we should have no deficit. I mean, it's ridiculous.
It's a good thing to balance the budget.
That's an open invitation to government spending.
Well, I
Similarly,
think that's
when you
not such a bad invitation.
All right, but we want to balance the budget.
You know, it's just, the feeling the love in this room is really, it really just,
You're glowing.
It's up my leg. Yeah, it really does.
We want to balance. We want to balance the budget at American levels, at levels that Americans have been satisfied with for years.
Okay, it's time for our studio audience to vote. So, who is your budget winner? Is it? No, not yet. The audience votes when we return, and then we'll tell you who wins.